All right. Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of A Cup of Joe. My name is Joe Escobedo, and with me on the show today is Laura Cooke. Laura Cooke is the Managing Director of Explore Communications here in Singapore. So thanks so much for being on the show, Laura.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. I know we've been talking in the past about kind of creative ways to generate leads, particularly during this time. And so I know you've had
Mm,
very interesting ones in the past that I would love to hear about. I think
mm.
I'll kick it off because I was actually attended one of your previous ones, which was at a
I know, I can't believe that.
yeah. I was literally walking around. For those of you who are not familiar with what Laura had done, and I'd love you to explain more, is you kind of created like
Mm,
this, sushi style. It was very much like a sushi restaurant within a conference. And so once again, something I
exactly.
still remember because I go to a lot of conferences as a speaker. Sometimes I get bored and I walk around. And it was definitely something that stood out to me. And I was like, wow, what is this? What kind of, kind of business is this?
That's
So
what we're going for, really.
yeah. So once again, you were the brains behind the operation. I'd love to hear kind of tell me a bit more about it and kind of what was the idea behind it.
Yeah, sure. This is so I set up Explore Communications quite recently, the last few months, and it's been going really well. But this is in my kind of past life, previous role. And really what we wanted to do is exactly what you said, stand out at a conference. I mean, we've all been to hundreds, if not more, conferences. And I think it's really frustrating when you're walking around, you get exactly the same. So what we wanted to do was do something that hit our objectives, which was to get in front of new clients,
Mm.
really get new logos. It wasn't really about promoting ourselves to our current clients, although obviously some of them were there, so that was great.
Yeah.
But it was really about sort of standing out and being different. My old company was a Japanese heritage company, so that helped with a bit of a tie-in. It wasn't just a random sushi bar, there was a bit of a tie-in to actually the heritage of the company. And so it made a little bit more sense. But the whole concept, which I can talk through a little bit more, really drove people to get excited about it and get free food and drink, which works very well here in Singapore. um, but also, it was a good way to actually capture data from people coming through our space. So getting their email addresses, who they were, who they worked for, and then also meeting them in person. So that's also important, face to face, or having that kind of human interaction. So we could then kind of connect with them after the interaction,
Mm.
and kind of circle back.
Yeah. I now it makes sense now that I realize it is a Japanese company. So this
Yeah,
thing makes perfect sense now. I was wondering
yeah,
that's quite wild. Um,
exactly.
and then you also mentioned kind of the data collection as well. Was that like by collecting emails, or was there like a different way in which you collected the data?
Absolutely. So it wasn't
Business,
an
sorry.
obvious data collection, which is why the sushi bar worked so well. People would come through our space and they would log in to get a seat at the sushi bar.
Ah, okay.
They would log in their details, so their email, a simple email address, name, job title. They go and sit down, and then personally in front of them, in front of their seat, it will pop up with their name, welcoming them to the sushi bar seat, asking them to pick a plate that was going around the sushi bar. They picked a plate, put it in front of them, and a video in front of them would come up with a case study from one of our capabilities. There were 3 different color plates for different capabilities: content, e-commerce, and programmatic. So we kind of focused on a few different things that we wanted to promote, and then that kind of engaged people. So they weren't very it wasn't too obvious that we were kind of taking their data. Not that we would have been using it for much, we just really wanted to be able to connect back with them if they showed interest, if they were chatting to one of our team members, and also just to track success rate of what kind of clients were coming through the space. Obviously, sometimes with marketing, it's so hard to actually know how well you're doing.
Yeah.
You're sending stuff out there and trying to see, whose attention you're actually capturing. So that was a great way to be able to do a bit of a kind of review afterwards.
Yeah, no, I think it's brilliant. I love the idea of the color coding the plates with the offering. as well as playing the case study right there. I mean, they have to watch it because they're sitting there enjoying their nice sushi. So it's a nice kind of thing to keep them occupied or kind of share more about the brand in a kind of subtle way versus kind of just like shoving
Yeah.
brochures or whatever they're in their face. So okay, I didn't know about the latter part. That's actually very, very cool.
Yeah, it was a really fun project, and you know what, kind of it came from a marketing services company, so we had a vast amount of people within our business who did really cool stuff like this for different clients. So our event team, part of this, worked very closely with my team, which was the comms and marketing department in-house at the marketing services network, so it's a bit complicated. But they were, there was a big team, and I think it was about all coming together to create this kind of big project, and it worked really well. I think there was another element which I think is really important, which is the slightly more, I guess, serious and corporate part of it, to kind of legitimize it, I suppose, which is that we created a white paper, which is basically a long form piece of content writing, which is based on research, like really, really strong research. And we created that white paper so that we had something to talk about at the actual stand at the sushi bar, that it wasn't just us kind of showcasing our wares. We're actually giving back a little bit. And we actually did this concept a couple of years running at different events. And we partnered with a couple of different publications like The Economist and MIT Technology Review to create the white papers.
With the white papers printed out, or was it a digital thing that you shared with them electronically?
Yeah, digital. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was digital. We shared it, actually, we did a few sessions within our space, but then we also shared it afterwards to recontact those people who had come through our space as well. So that was another way of kind of getting back in touch with them with that data. But I think it was, stuff that they would be really interested in receiving, rather than just sort of spamming them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm guessing that whole initiative helped hit your KPIs, which was generating new logos, or at least having meetings with new logos.
Yeah, exactly. We, from memory, I think we had about 90 new leads, which is great. And then after recontacting them all, I think we had about 10 hot leads that we passed on to our kind of client, our sales teams to properly continue contacting.
Yeah.
And one was a key client. It was a personal care client. And it was one that we had no connection with throughout the whole company. It was also a client that we knew that we wouldn't be able to get in with people within our company. It would have to go through an event, and it had been on the list at a global level and at a regional level, this client. So we got in and started having meetings with them. So that was, I think, quite a big win. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Like I said, I know you're very creative, and I think it's one of your kind of unique abilities. So I'd love to hear kind of any other ideas or anything else that you've done creatively that's kind of helped generate those leads, those meetings.
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously at the moment it's very difficult to do a big sushi bar concept,
Yeah.
but I think you can still be really creative in the virtual space. I think more and more people have been playing around with the capabilities of like Zoom and other video conferencing services. And you can kind of break people out into teams, and you can actually create some really engaging content. And if you can then base something like that, which is kind of like a real event, and then create some content to support it, something really interesting that's really going to capture the attention of the people who are viewing this, and get people talking, maybe even debating things. I think that's kind of the sweet spot, and where you can really get people kind of emotional about things, and then get them bought into your brand or your company. There's so many different things you could be doing, and I think at the moment also the audience virtually is pretty captive. I mean, you look at Europe, everyone's either in lockdown or going back into lockdown or fearful about lockdown, or it's pretty shaky, especially in Europe, and I think the US is the same, pockets of Asia as well. We're all struggling and we're finding it hard. So I think something light, something to get people talking, get people excited, that's going to get them engaged in your brand. And then, you know, how do you continue those conversations so it's not just a one-off? Regularity, how are you creating other sorts of content like visuals or video contents to support, that are just engaging, and people kind of just start to see your brand around quite often, and then build quite a lot of respect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think most companies have realized they need to obviously switch to online events. I think the challenge, as you know, an audience member, and I speak a lot at these conferences as well, is how do you keep things fresh? Because you know, everyone's experienced, most people are experiencing Zoom fatigue or some kind of similar kind of fatigue. It's the same webinars,
Yeah.
the same format over and over. So you mentioned kind of doing debates as a way to mix up the formats, because you know, listening to someone speak for over half an hour on a webinar is really, really hard as an audience member.
It's impossible, yeah.
So once again, I'd love to hear, you talked about debates. What are some ways in which companies can incorporate debates, for example, into their online events?
Yeah, I think debates just make it a bit more exciting. I think thing is that, you know, you go to an event and you see a panel, and that's quite difficult. A debate is only as good as the people you have debating, and also obviously what they're debating about. So the content has to be right, and it all comes back to that, really. You know, what are your audience going to be most excited, annoyed, frustrated about? And then how do you bring in the right people who are going to have a difference of opinion and who are going to be quite pithy, but also be smart about it? And then potentially have someone like a really decent journalist to chair it, who can really kind of throw in some interesting questions, really steer the conversation. I found that this in real events as well. When we would pitch for a panel at a big event, we'd always make sure that the content was really, really high level, and that we had a really, really decent journalist, so that they could kind of steer the conversation. But I think debates would be interesting. I also think creation of interesting video content to go with it, to break up the conversation. But you're right, everyone's kind of stuck behind their computers, but at the same time, that's a positive. They're stuck behind their computers. So how do you make it interesting for them?
Yeah.
And so kind of want to come back and view again, and that it's really valuable for them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good idea, and I'm thinking at the top of my head that's maybe something we might evolve from some of my online events as well, because you know, you do something over and over, and even as a content creator, you're kind of like, okay, what's next? And yeah, there is some value not only in terms of education, but in terms of entertainment. If you have people who have two strong opposing opinions, kind of going at it, is quite fun to watch. And like you said, it really depends on who you pick as well, because I've been to tons of events where like the panels are like, yeah, you're right, but you know, you made a good point too. And, you know, and then I what's what, which is I will always remember. I was on the panel as kind of like I think I was the moderator, and there was these two guys just going at it, and I was like, man, this is intense, but everyone was loving it. I was like,
it's always quite interesting, because it can be quite awkward, but awkward can sometimes be quite good.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was right
Very
up to these guys,
cool.
but but I think it does, going back to your point, does mix things up. It kind of breaks away from the usual kind of talking head, or, you know, I like that you said incorporating videos or other kind of visual elements to break things up. Otherwise, yeah, it's very easy to get, you know, lose the audience. And then you're going to stay through the entire video because it's the same thing over and over. So I really like that idea. I'm going to try incorporating that as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's quite engaging. And yeah, I think there are various other things as well. Like you can still create, you know, longer form white papers around something that you're really interested in, because I do think that people will sit down and read something if it's going to impact their roles. I think a lot of people are focused on training, learning and development for themselves. So anything that you can do to help kind of improve people's knowledge in an area that you can help in, I think that's really beneficial. And then obviously you can use that content, break it up, share it on social media, create images out of it, create videos, animations. There's all sorts you can do with a kind of long form white paper. And I've produced a lot in my working life. And it's something that I think is very useful. People talk about white papers and they talk about long form content and think, oh, it's a bit dull, no one has time to read it. But if you write it in an engaging way, you chunk it up in interesting pieces of content within the white paper, and you're able to present it in a visually pleasing way that draws the eye, then I think it's a really good possibility. I think that's a really good option for promoting.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to start the mini debate now because I'll take the opposing side as this short form.
Okay.
You take the long form.
Yeah.
So, once again, I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of like, long form. Does it actually appeal to directors enough? In my experience, like I said, managerial level where they have more time, they love like the longer kind of white papers so they can like sink their teeth into. But I'm curious, like, does the same appeal still work for a busy executive, a director and up who doesn't have the time to read maybe a 3 to 5 page white paper?
I think that it depends on the sort of person that they are. I mean, I've known lots of senior people, CEO level, C-suite, who are just hungry to learn more and interested to read a good piece of content. I think it depends on the level of the content, to be honest. If it's not high level enough, if it doesn't have strong enough research behind it, if it's not written in an engaging but thoughtful way, then actually, I don't think they would read it. But if it's written at the right level and it's actually going to benefit them and it's something interesting and new that they might read, then yeah, I think they would, because they're constantly speaking to clients and faced with people coming at them, journalists as well, asking them for an opinion on things, and they've got to form that so quickly. So I know absolutely leaders that I've worked with in the past are desperate to just take in any stat or information to be able to pull out at any other opportunity. But I also think obviously short form is brilliant. To be able to have a bit of a snippet, to be able to update yourself. But from long form you can create lots of short form, which can then go out to people in different ways. And so you can create something that's long form that lasts for pretty much, I reckon, about a year. If you manage it well, and obviously things don't change so much as, pre-COVID to COVID, and probably COVID to post-COVID. If you have an interesting, thought starter about technology, you can probably keep it running for a good few months.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Think with Google does an excellent job of this. If you look at kind of their LinkedIn profile, their social media profiles, going back to what you're saying, they pull out these very simple stats from the research they're doing, and then it'll lead back to a blog or a white paper they do, which is much more meatier in terms of the content. But that's what I think for me captures my attention, because it's just literally a white background, just some big font in terms of the numbers, and then what is the key point that you want to get across. So I think I always think about it in terms of like a movie, movie production. You have like the movie teaser, you have the the pre-interviews and stuff like that, and then you lead it into the actual theatrical release or whatever it is. So I think thinking of it from that point of view, I think white papers still have value to them.
And also, sort of bring it back to data collection. You can drive people from a stat to a white paper, and then they download that, and then you know who's downloading your white paper, who's interested in you, how many times they've downloaded it, your content. So it's kind of a way to understand who's looking at you, your brand, and what you have to say. I think that's kind of how we've used it in the past.
Yeah. Once again, I'm going to play devil's advocate because I know you're smart and I know you can battle with me. I think where a lot of particularly B2B brands struggle or have a misconception in terms of, if I download your white paper, then I'm automatically going to be interested in your offerings. When in the case, it may not be true. It could be like, I'm interested in this particular topic, therefore I downloaded, and I may see your logo, but I may not be interested. So as marketers, how do you bridge the gap between someone who's downloaded it versus those who, how do you filter it out and say, okay, who is actually interested in doing business with us, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. And one download doesn't mean interest. I completely agree in that sense. But you can track lots of different things. So you can track how many times they're downloading different white papers. So they're downloading a lot of your content, then that might gauge a bit of interest. You can obviously see if there are events as well that you're at, when we're allowed to go back to events, or even if they're wanting to attend any of your virtual kind of webinars. I think it's looking at it not just about one download, but actually how many times they're interacting with you. And then if they've interacted with you a number of times, why not reach out? They could just say no, not of interest. But there's no harm reaching out. They've shown an interest, even if they just want to talk about some of the content with you. That's a great in, and could start to build a relationship. So
yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that's the point I was trying to get across, is that you're right. One download doesn't necessarily mean that they're interested in your company, but I think, to your point, if they're downloading multiple pieces of content you create, they're attending your events or attending your webinars, I think that is usually a better indicator than just one white paper download. So I think, yes, I'm really glad you brought that up for people who are listening or watching this and saying, oh, why aren't they buying from me right now? It's like, particularly in B2B, it's usually a longer sales cycle, particularly if you're a high ticket item. So I'm really glad you got across.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just kind of sounds weird, but watching and seeing, what they're doing, and working out when the right time is to contact them. I think that's the right way of doing it. And making sure you obviously stay within all the rules and regulations with recontacting through data, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Laura, those are some really, really good points in terms of generating, leads. Very, very creative, very out of the box thinking. So I really love that. Appreciate you sharing. If there's anything else that comes to mind, otherwise.
No, that's great. Perfect.
All right, awesome. Well, Laura, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us. It's very, very helpful. Last question is, how can people get in touch with you?
They can get in touch with me at my email address. Actually, my website has everything on it. So www.explore-communications.com. So it's got my contact details and then everything about what I offer. So
Awesome. Well, check it out if you're watching this. So thank you so much, Laura. Really, really appreciate it. And if you're watching this or listening to this and you found it helpful, please do feel free to share it with your colleagues. Some really, really creative tips in here. So feel free to try them out. Let us know if it works. And thanks so much. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks.